Hello everyone, welcome back to the next video of this tutorial series. And in this part of the tutorial, I will show you how you can pick up a sword. Like so. So, let's get right into it. In order for us to interact with the weapon, we will need an input. And starting from Unreal 5.1, Epic Games has changed the input system into enhanced input. So if we go into our project settings over here, and if you go to inputs, you can see that now the axis and action mappings are now deprecated. So now you should use the enhanced input instead, right over here. And if you are using Unreal 5.0 or below, then you'll be using the old input system. To create a new input system is actually not that hard. We don't need to do anything from the project settings. So let's close that. So first, let's go into our third person folder right here. And within this folder, you can see that there's an input folder over here. What I'm going to do is to drag it into my blueprints folder over here. So let's do that and drag that in and just simply move it there. And within this input folder, let's go into the folder called actions. And here is where all the input actions we will make. So to make an input actions, let's right click and then go into input, click on the input action right here. And I'm going to name this as IA interaction, like so. And if we open this IA interaction, we can see all these different settings. There's actually nothing that we will need to change. And depending on what type of input you are trying to achieve, you can change the variable type. There are these different variable types. It's pretty much for like moving around. And if you need to move around, then you'll probably use the axis 2D and stuff like that. So, but since we are only using it as a button press for our interaction, we can leave it as a digital boolean. Okay, so let's close that. If we go out of the actions folder from this IMC default over here, let's open that up. Here's where we will add in our mappings for our input. So let's click on this plus icon over here. And then from here, we can choose in our newly created input, which is the interaction input. For the button press, I'm just going to make my button as E. And with the triggers and modifier, there's nothing we need to add. So that's all we pretty much need to do. Now that we have our interaction input mapped, we can go into our third person blueprint and add an input event from there. So let's go back to our blueprints folder and then go into our third person blueprint. And from the event graph, right click and then search for IA interaction right here. And you can see that with the new enhanced input system, there are different triggers that are available to use. And most of the time, you'll pretty much use the triggered or the started. And what we want to use is to use the started. This will enable us to have the event fired only once when the button is pressed. So for example, if I am to start from triggered, I'm just going to do a print string right here. And then I'm going to change the string into button pressed. Right. So with this, if I am to test this out, you see if I hold in E, the button press will keep on being triggered. If we do it with started, you can see that if I press on E and I hold down the E button, it won't keep on firing the event. So that's exactly what we need for our interaction. Next, we will be using the sphere trace for objects as our detection for weapons to be picked up. I'll disconnect the print string for now and then move that to the side. Then let's right click and then search for sphere trace for objects. You want the sphere trace for objects here, not the multi one. Just do the sphere trace for objects here. And then with this sphere trace for objects, what we will need is to have a start and end location for it. And this will be the location of the player itself. So let's right click and then search for get actor location right here. And then with the return value of the get actor location, let's put that into the start and end of the sphere trace for objects. And for the radius, it's simply the radius of the sphere itself. So I'm going to have this as 100 for now. I'll also link the execution from started to the sphere trace for objects. As for the object type, it's going to be the object type for the collision. So let me show you what that means. For example, if we go to the mesh of our third person character, and we scroll down to the collision part of the character right here, the collision presets here. If you open that up, we can see the object type over here. And object type right now is a pawn. So back in the sphere trace for objects, if I make this into an array, let's make it into an array. There will be different collision object types we can choose from. So right here we see a pawn. That's where the mesh collision for this mesh is going to be. So with the sphere trace for object types, it was essentially check if the object it's interacting with has a specific object collision type. And if it's true, then it will interact with it. For now, I'm just going to leave it as row statics. And to see this visually, we can show the sphere by changing the draw debug type into for duration. And if you press on the arrow down here, you can change the draw type. I'm going to change this into 3 seconds actually. And then compile and save. And then let's test this out. So if I press the interaction button, you can see a sphere that's drawn. It'll be green if the interaction with the object type is true, which right now, since the ground is a static mesh, and its collision type is row static, it will return a green sphere. If I was to jump and press, like so, then it will be red since it's not detecting any row static object type. So if it's detecting a row static object type, it'll be green. If not, it'll be red. And that's how the sphere trace for objects will work. For our weapons, we will want to make a custom collision type so that the sphere trace can only detect the weapons. And to create one, we will need to go to project setting. So from our edit, let's go to our project settings. And if we go and find the collision tab over here from engine and the collision settings, we'll see this options for our object channels. And that will be where we can add in a custom object type for our collision. So let's go ahead and go to new object channel over here and click on it. It'll prompt up this window, and then all you need to do is to add in the name. And I'm going to name this as weapon. And for default response, I can just keep it at block. Doesn't really matter much for now. So let's do accept. And there we have our collision type added into the object channels. So let's close that. Back in the sphere trace, you can see that if I do a drop down, I don't see the weapon object type over here. That's because I haven't compiled and saved. So if I go ahead and compile and save, you can see that this enums are updated with the weapon over here. So we can change into that instead. So with this, the sphere trace will only detect objects with the weapon object type. The next thing to do is to change the object collision type of our base weapon. So let's go into our base weapon. Right here, open that up. And then in our viewport, we can select the boss collision. And then let's head it over to the collision tab over here. Go to the collision presets. Open that up. And you can see that the object type right now is a row dynamic. And to change this, we can change this overlap all dynamic into custom over here. And then from this object type, we can then change into weapon. And since this is only a detection, we would only need curry only. We don't really need collision enabled. And you can also play around with the settings over here to suit your needs. For me, I know that I won't be using visibility camera, so I'm just going to put ignore on these. And now I'll just leave the rest as is. All right, now we can compile and save. And let's drop in the weapon sword into our level. And you can see if you scroll down to if you select the boss collision here and scroll down to collisions, it will be of object type because we changed the parent class of the base weapon here. So the child will also update into whatever the parent will be changed into. So there's that. To test if the collision object type is working, we can go back to our third person. And then from the return value, we can call in a branch. And then if it's true, then I'm just going to do a print string for now. And then change the hello into hit. Compile and save. And we can go ahead and test it out. So if I press E near the sword, it should give me a hit because we are hitting the weapon. And we have set up the collision as weapon type. So it should be green and it will have a hit. So the sphere trace should only interact with the sword only. And for everything else within the scene, the sphere should remain red. So when the sphere trace detects the weapon, what should it do? Well, it should equip the weapon. And the easiest way to do this is most likely by spawning the weapon onto the player. Back in our third-person blueprint, let's first use a spawn actor node. So first I'm going to unlink the print screen and then move it aside. And then right click and then search for spawn actor from class right here. And then link that true into the spawn actor from class. The class of the spawn actor will be whatever weapon the sphere trace detects. So we will need a variable for this. We will also need a spawn transform. And this will be the location of where the actor should be spawned. Since we'll be attaching it to the player, we can use a get actor transform. So let's right click and search for get actor transform right here. And then we can link that up to the spawn transform. At the sphere trace for object node, there's a out hit. This will provide us with the information of what it was hit. And in order to access the specific information we need, we'll use a break hit result. So drag out from the out hit and then search for break hit result right here. And if we open up the break hit result, we can see that there's a lot of variables that we could use. Since the weapon is an actor, we'll use the hit actor node right here. Now we could just connect the hit actor into the class like this. And once it's connected, you'll see that there's an instigator that we'll need. And we will also need an owner as well. And these two nodes we can simply use reference to self. So let's right click and search for self. And let's connect these two like so. And compile save. If we test it out, we can see that the weapons will be spawned. But the problem for this setup is that it may not give us the control that we might need later on in the future, since we cannot access the variables within the weapon class with this method. For example, if I go back to my base weapon class, and then I can add in a variable named test, and I'll leave it as a boolean for now. Compile and save. And if I go into my spawn character, if I want to access this test variable, if I do get test, you can see that there's no test variable, so you can't access it through this way. And the way to solve this problem is to figure out how we can save the hit actor into a variable that is compatible with the weapons class and use that variable to spawn a weapon instead. So how do we do that? Well, within this third person blueprint, I will make a new variable. And I'll name this as pick up weapon. And for the type, I'm going to change this as a BP base weapon right here. So I'm going to make an object reference to the base weapon. Now if we drag this into the event graph, do a set. If we try to connect the hit actor into the pickup weapon, you won't be able to connect because it's still not compatible with the base weapon object reference itself. Now you might think that it's okay, that's fine, there's another way to do it. I'll just use a cast to my weapon. So let's say cast to sword, my sword weapon, like that. And then I'll link up the BP sword. I'll just link that up and have it set as the sword. But with this setup, we'll have another problem. And the problem is that what if the weapon is not a sword? What if the weapon is an axe or a greatsword? Then you have to make a logic to check which weapon it is and then use multiple casts. And I won't recommend doing that. First, it will be a nightmare, and second, casting to another blueprint is usually very resource intensive. When you cast, it will load in all the blueprints of the same class into the level, which if you have a lot of different weapons, then all of them will be loading into the level that you are currently on. So it will slow down the game and allow unnecessary assets to be loaded into the game when you don't want to. So here, I'll introduce the concept of blueprint interfaces. A blueprint interface is a collection of functions that are read-only, and the functions can be called in other blueprints so you can create interactions between different blueprints. It works like what a cast would do, and it's a more efficient way for blueprints to communicate with each other. It'll be easier to understand by creating one, so without further ado, let's go ahead and make one. In our blueprints folder, I'm going to create a new folder and call this the interface. And then within this interface folder, I'm going to right click and then go into blueprints. And then at the third option over here, there's a blueprint interface. I'm going to click on that. And then I'll name that as BPI for blueprint interface _ interactions. Like that. So with that created, we can open this up. As you can see, there is already a function within the interface and it's only read only. You won't be able to add anything within this function. So if you right click on it, you can see that cannot read new nodes in the read-only graph. So this is only read-only. But first, let's rename this function. And I'm going to name this as interact with weapon. With the functions in the blueprint interface, if you click on it, you can also add in some inputs and outputs if you need. In our case, we will need an input to reference our playable character in order for us to have this function work properly. So I'm going to add in an actor reference. From a Boolean, I'm going to change this into actor. Right here, and then object reference. And then I'm going to name this as reference actor. So then I can reference my playable character into this function right here. And that's all we need to do for this blueprint interface for now. So we can click, compile, and save, and then close this off. And let's head back to our third-person blueprint. So within our event graph, we can call in our blueprint interface function. So let's right-click and search for interact with weapons right here. You'll see a BPI interactions that we made. And here we will have our function. So what I'm going to do with this function is first the reference actor. I'm going to do as reference to self. So get the reference to self and then put that in the reference actor. And the target, let's delete this first. The target will be the hit actor. So let's connect this into the target over here. And then from here, let's put this in before the spawn actor because we want this to run first before we do a spawn actor. So I'm going to disconnect the class over here and then get rid of that. Put that over here and then connect from true to and connect this into spawn actor. And instigator, you'll probably need to. Since we don't have the class anymore, it'll disappear. So once we have put in the class here again, it will remake instigator and we'll just connect that from there. And if you were to compile and save right now, there will be an error. And the reason why is we haven't selected class to use, which we will use the pickup weapon over here later in a bit. But for now, the next step we need to do is to trigger the interact with weapon function within the base weapon. So let's head over there. So within the BP base weapon, let's first delete this first. We need to access the blueprint interfaces. And to do that, we can go to the class settings. And then from the class settings, there's a place called interfaces. And in the implemented interface, we can add in a interface. So if we do add and then search for the interface that we need, which is the BPI interactions right here, you can see that there will be this new interfaces tab within this My Blueprint tab. And we can use this in our event graph. So if you see, if we drag it, it will say you cannot put this in the graph, but it'll be simply just right click and then implement event. It will create the event of the interact with weapon right here. And this is what we need in order to trigger the event. So back in the third person character, this will trigger the event within the third person character, which in turns will tell the BP base weapon here to like trigger this event when the code is running through this specific section. From the reference editor, we can drag out from the node here and then do a cast to third person. In this case, using a cast won't matter that much since the third person character will be used all the time within the level. So from our cast, we can set the pickup weapon. So from as BP third person character, we can drag this out and then do a set pickup weapon right here. So it will grab the pickup weapon variable in the third person character. And then let's connect that together. What we'll set is we'll set this blueprint, this BP base weapon, into the pickup weapon. So we can do a reference to self. So let's just type in self and then get a reference to self like that. And then connect the self to the pickup weapon. So when this is triggered, it will set the third person. It will set the pickup weapon in the third person character blueprint into this base weapon. And since we are using it in the base weapon, if we use let's say a BP sword instead, then this will become the sword. And that's the power of using the parent class in order to, so then that the child class will do the same thing as the parent class. So with this, we can just leave this as is for now and then just compile and save. and then go back to our third person character blueprint. And from here, we can set the class. Since we trigger this function, and then it will trigger this event over here. So then the variable in the third person character pickup weapon will be set. So we'll have a variable for the pickup weapon here now. So we can drag this up into the event graph. So get the pickup weapon, and then set this into the class of the spawn actor. And actually, I'm gonna drag this over here too, just to clean up a bit. Like that. And now there's a new instigator too, right? So we can just put the self into this instigator here. And if we compile and save, it should be okay now. Once we have this all set up, I'm going to actually reset the pickup weapon again, just in case. I don't think you really need to do this, but I'm just doing just as a secondary measure, so then the pickup weapon will be set again as the spawn actor. Right, and then we can call in our AttachToCharacter function within the pickup weapon blueprint. So let's search for AttachToCharacter. So we can call this function here. And we'll need a socket name. And a socket name, we can grab it from the base weapon itself. And if you recall, if you recall in our base item, we made an AttachToSocket right here. And then we'll use this name for our socket name. And if you go to base weapon, if you click on that, we can see that there's AttachToSocket over here. And then if you go into the sword, since this is also a child of the base weapon, and base weapon is the child of the base item, we have AttachToSocket here. So we can access these AttachToSocket variables from just within this pickup weapon here. So by dragging this out and then going to get AttachToSocket, we can get the AttachToSocket over here, and then put this in to be in our socket name. So this will attach the spawned actor, which is the sword, the weapon itself, onto the character that we are using. And right now we don't have a socket in our third person character. So let's go ahead and make a socket in our third person character. So within our characters folders, if we go into mannequins and then go into meshes, we'll see the Unreal 5 mannequin characters. And there's a skeleton over here. Just click into the SK mannequin skeleton. And here is where we can add in our sockets. So if we scroll around, we can see that Unreal itself have a few sockets already created, which you could use for your games. But for us, we're going to make a socket in the spine. Let's see, I think spine 2 over here. Yeah, I'll just make it in spine 2. And then if I right click, we can do an add socket. So this will create a socket right here. And if we want to have a mesh attached to the socket, we can right click again and then do add preview mesh. I'm going to add in the sword that I'm using. So the hero sword 11 right here. So when we add this in, we can see the sword in our skeleton. And what we could do now first, let's rename this socket first. I'm going to rename this as unequip. I'll just name this as unequipped sword. And then we can also position this into the place we would want this unequipped sword to be at. So it will be on our left side of our hip. So let me do that for now. All right, so let's say I'm happy with where it is. I want it to be like somewhere over here. So I can go ahead and actually copy this name first, and then first save this up. And then back into my sword, my BP weapon sword, I can change this AttachToSocket from none to the socket that I'm using, so unequipped sword. So let's compile and save. And now if this code is to run, it will take the AttachToSocket variable of the weapon sword over here, which is unequipped sword, and then do this function right here, and it'll attach the sword onto our player, which is the mannequin. So it'll attach the unequipped sword socket right here. And now we can go ahead and test this out. So now you can see that our sword is attached to the hip of our third person character. And if I keep on pressing E, it will keep on detecting the it'll keep detecting the sword because we haven't changed the object type of the sword. So there's this bug that right here that we need to fix. And another bug is also like you see the sword is actually still within the scene. And what we're doing is essentially we're just spawning a new sword onto our character. So the original sword, which is this one in the scene, it's still going to be in there. So we'll have to like destroy the actor from there. And we see in the outliner we're actually creating a bunch of different sword. So all these sword are actually stacked on top of each other because we're still detecting the sword from our hip. So that's why when we press E, it will create more of the sword on our character. Let's first fix the bug where the weapon we picked up will remain in the level. So back in our BP base weapon, all we need to do is to destroy the actor. So let's right click and then search for destroy actor. Right here. And then link this up behind the set pickup weapon. And we'll just have these destroy actor to target itself. This will simply delete the weapon from a level after the pickup weapon is set. So compile and save, and that's all we need to do here. As for the collision object type bug, we can solve it by changing the collision profile name of the weapon before we attach it to the player character. So first, let me go to the project settings to explain some stuff. And back in our collisions, from the presets right here, if we open this up, we can see a number of collision profiles right here that Unreal has already provided for us. And for now, I'll be using the no collision profile name right here, since it will just make everything, there won't be any collisions on the weapon. And of course, we can also make a custom profile name if we need it. Just simply click on new, and then we can change the settings over here. So let's say if I want a profile name for my weapon, I can change this into weapon and then name this as weapon like that, and then set my settings here, and then to accept, it will create the profile for that so I can access it later on. But for now, I'm just going to use no collision. So back in our event graph of our third-person character, I am going to, from the pickup weapon over here, I'm going to search for the box collision. Right here. So I'll get the box collision of my pickup weapon, which is the base weapon. If you recall, we have a box collision right here. So we're going to change this profile into a no collision right here through using the blueprint. And from this box collision, let's drag that out and then search for a set collision profile name right here. And then we'll attach this before the attach to character, because we want this to be run before we attach the weapon onto our character. So let's change the execute line into the set collision profile name, and then have this linked up to the attached character here. And I'm just gonna move some of the stuff here for a bit. And for the in collision profile name, I'm going to change this into no collision, like so. And then if we compile and save, this bug should be fixed. So to test the two bugs out, let's go in and play our game. And then if I press on E for interact with the sword over here, it should disappear, and then like so. So you can see that the sword now has disappeared from the level. And if I were to press E again, you can see that it no longer detects any weapon in the scene. So that's how we will fix this bug. And that will be all for this part of the tutorial. There's still a lot of things to cover, and I want to keep each video as short as possible. So in the next video, I'll go over how we can drop the weapon if we pick up another weapon of the same type into our hand. So look forward to that, and thank you for watching. And I hope this is helpful for everyone. And as always, never stop learning.